too. So,
Okay, sounds
okay.
good.
Okay, Kieran, I have been so excited to have you on the show. I know we've tried to do this interview a few times. I'm really excited you're here with me today. So, first of all, welcome to the show. Kieran, let's start off by you just giving us a quick snapshot of who Kieran Nair is, and then we'll dive into everything we want to talk about today.
Thanks, yeah. And first off, I just want to say thank you for having me on and for producing the great content you've been producing over these last several years. I've been really enjoying it. In terms of who I am as Kieran Nair, I'm an early 40s hospitalist living out here in BC. I have my lovely wife Nadine and three kids between the ages of 7 and 15, which are keeping me very, very busy. I have a lot of interests outside of medicine. One of our ones that we spend a lot of time talking about is obviously in the finance world, in both personal finance and then as well around value investing, which I've been studying kind of since residency overall. That joy and love has kind of led me to write the Financially Free MD blog, which I think I'd previously done in the past and unfortunately let go. But outside of that, just love participating in sports. And recently, in the last several years, I've been involved in more kind of administrative roles in medicine as well. So doing a lot of different things.
I want to give people some context about how we got to know one another, how we became friends. So there was an episode that I had released. It was with Andrew Hallam, and on that episode, I had talked about some of the struggles I had been experiencing myself committing to my own investing strategy. And Karen, you were kind enough to reach out to me then, and we had a great phone conversation. And you kind of heard me out, gave me some advice along the way on how I could build something that I could stick to. And that's kind of for me where it took off. And recently we had a great time just kind of chatting away over brunch in Toronto. So Kieran, thank you for that, by the way. And I always love talking to you. And I want to just start off by getting your perspective on some of the challenges that we mid career physicians can experience because you took some time 3 months ago or so when you were coming back from your year away in the French Riviera, which we're going to get to. And you talked about some of the challenges that you yourself had experienced once you hit mid career. Because I can say for myself, approaching the 10-year point of radiology, Kieran, you start to get a little bit more comfortable, things start to get a bit more routine, and then we have this tendency, at least I have, to pick up new responsibilities, to pick up new obligations. And I even hit a point where it started to eat away at me for a little bit of time. And I can talk about my experience too, but I want to know about your experience, some of the challenges that you faced mid career, because I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people listening today.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a significant issue that a lot of people experience in mid-career. And first off, I think I'm the last person to be giving a prescription for the right way to go about this because, as you know, a big reason why I took the year away was after experiencing significant burnout related to everything that I had taken on in the mid-career setting. I think we start off as we come out of residency or as a professional into the beginning, early stages of your career. You start off really focusing on trying to maintain your competency in what you're doing and the practice of whatever it is you've taken on as a profession, and you're quite fixated on that, and it's exciting in that early phase of things. And speaking for myself, at that time you also add on trying to build a family and having kids, and while you're finding you might be getting some competence in your career, you find out very quickly you have very little competence in being a parent. It's a very
Yeah.
significant challenge, and you're constantly facing new things that you thought you knew how to handle and you can't handle at all. So for those first 5 years, I found that for myself, it was just a constantly challenging environment of learning in a new setting and then managing the balance of, sleep and your own personal health and everything else that goes along with that. I think for my situation with three kids, it took until about 5 to 7 years after residency where I started to find, okay, I'm getting a balance back in my life. I feel like I have a feel of this parenting thing, doing okay in my career. I feel like I'm competent in the practice of medicine, and I was finally starting to get my health back on track. Losing that extra weight you put on from eating all the kids' leftovers and whatnot. That
Yeah, yeah, I still do it, man.
yeah, yeah, you got to let that frugality part of your life like go to let some of the food go to waste instead of eating it all, right? But for myself, I think at that point it was okay, well, what's the next challenge that I can kind of take on? And although I was very focused on the finance side of life and learning investing, I was also feeling somewhat comfortable in that and was looking for something else. And in my setting, I was fortunate enough to have some colleagues say they thought I might be able to take on some different roles more on the administrative side of medicine, and I did see some value in that given that, the quality of how we deliver healthcare is an important thing. And I got myself more engaged with those kind of activities, both, as a hospitalist lead in the province, but then also negotiating contracts. And I found it very interesting in the learning curve that was going along with it. But I find that it's insidious how these things can happen, where sometimes you take on these extra roles and responsibilities, and then you can slip away the other things that you know are important to you, but you're kind of pushing them aside because they feel like they can go on the back burner a bit. And specifically in my situation in the mid-career, the other thing that was very significant to leading to my burnout is that I had what I perceived at the time as a once in a lifetime opportunity, where I got offered a role as a partner in a biotech venture capital firm, which really melded that aspect of medicine that I really enjoyed, but also finance. And it felt like this is kind of a unique opportunity I'm never going to get again. And I happened at the same time that I was taking on these administrative roles and managing my young family. And very quickly things start to catch up on you. And it's can be very insidious how all this burnout creeps up on you, but you feel a lot of difficulty getting away from it, right? So I think we're type A personalities that tend to take things on and like to have new challenges in life, but we have to make sure it's not letting that bigger aspect of what we care about the most in our lives to slip away.
Can you tell us a bit more about how you knew that you were maybe starting to take on too much? What was going on in your life around that time that was a clear signal to you that there's too much going on and maybe things need to change?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I could say I figured it out quickly, but it didn't. It was something that built over about a year and a half. And I think the first thing that I started to notice in myself was that sleep was starting to be something that was starting to be affected significantly, where I would wake up in the middle of the night after a couple hours, and automatically my mind would go to all the challenges that I knew I was facing at that moment in time, and thinking through the problems and thinking how I was going to solve them. I think in addition to that, I should have listened. I had an early warning sign from my wife who said, I can see this is happening in you. You have a lot on your plate. I think you need to pull back some of the responsibilities. But again, as a type A individual who likes taking on challenges, and historically, I think as physicians, we're served well by our type A-ness. It helped us get to where we are in life. We had to study hard and work hard. And it's such a positive benefit to where we are that you don't have the ability to withdraw from something very easily. And despite her warnings and saying that this was something that was starting to occur, I kept on saying, I can see it's just another 6 months. I can balance this all out a little bit further. And unfortunately, these time commitments didn't easily end at any point in time, which was another part of the challenge. For me, the one that was a real stark situation that struck a chord, it kind of is ingrained in my memory now, but I had a moment where I was downstairs in this very room, stuck in a meeting. Somebody came, I could hear kind of noise happening upstairs of, children's tears and some arguing going on. And I came up looking to kind of quickly solve the problem because I had the next thing to move on to. And I was talking to my middle son and trying to solve it, but trying to solve it in a very quick way instead of really listening to him. And he suddenly had a big statement and said, you know what? You're never here, and all I really want is your time, and you never give it to me. And it was a devastating thing. It was, as a parent, that's kind of one of those things that you would hope to never hear. But that was essentially what it took to really hit me like a ton of bricks, to have the self-realization, wow, this has slipped away on you and you need to get back on track.
Kieran, that's a very powerful moment. I mean, in a way, I can sympathize with that because for me, what I was experiencing end of 2022 going into 2023 was a lot of clinic work piling up, and there'd be very busy days at the hospital followed by very busy shifts that I was taking on from home. And I vividly remember one day, I talked about this recently, where I came home after a grueling day at the hospital, walked in the door, had no time to decompress. Both my sons came at me, each was asking me for something specific, and all I could think about were the 200 cases that were building up on my work list that I had to get to. And in that moment, I truly felt broken. And I told my kids that I had my own little outburst, and everyone stopped what they were doing. And when I look back, that was my moment where I knew something had to change. It took me about 6 months from there to implement the changes, but we all have, I think, these moments that just hit us like a ton of bricks. I really appreciate you taking the time to share yours, and that was mine. Kieran, going on from there, tell us maybe about one, what kind of changes did you make? And maybe using your own experience, you can talk to us a bit about, do you have any guidelines that we can follow for making sure that the things we are taking on are truly aligning with what we want to do and putting in some checkpoints to make sure that we're not putting or taking on too much?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's something I spent a significant part of the time on that sabbatical year really thinking
Mm-hmm.
about because it was a big contributing factor to why we made the decision as a family that it was a worthwhile thing to experience amongst others. I think that the first thing is to again really have your key focus of what your core goals are, of where you're at in life, what your key missions are. And in that year, it was very clear to me, and that without a doubt, the top three things for me is my immediate family, my children, making sure that I'm providing everything I can as a parent and a father and a husband in that setting, and that's the paramount issue. Number two was my health because I had some issues we may get into as an additional thing that when your health isn't there, suddenly you're not able to necessarily provide on all these other fronts. And number three was my close personal relationships with friends and maintaining that. I realized that those were my key three things. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have other missions in life. I realized that even though those are your three most important things that you care about in terms of maintaining and ensuring you're providing your utmost best, there's other spheres in time that might not interfere with those moments. And finding missions or additional hobbies and interest when you can kind of create a clear boundary of the time around those activities where it doesn't interfere with the others. Specifically with the two roles that I was taking when I look back, it was the fact that there was random evening meetings that would suddenly come about urgently that I have to do for negotiating. And it felt like there was a constant urgent need to these settings, but they would happen to fall when a soccer game was on or when dinner time was supposed to be there, when it was
Mm-hmm.
family time. And it was the nature of, a bunch of physicians getting together with administrators. It was the only time that we could provide. Take that into the venture capital role, was the same idea. Suddenly we would have an opportunity and an investment that would require really advanced due diligence, really putting a lot of time and effort into it, and then immediately talking to investors and trying to fundraise around that. And it would just kind of happen unexpectedly. And now your next week is looking totally different than it was before. And the immediate places you take from are the areas that I was talking about earlier that are the key areas of life because you feel like you can push them off temporarily. So I found that moving forward, if there's things that I know can fall during the hours of when my kids are at school and not into the evenings, creating a clear boundary on where this time is protected time, I think is the key issue to make sure you're maintaining your key missions and taking care of yourself first and your family.
I think that discussion on boundaries is really, really important. Now, Kieran, just going to your professional missions right now, how many things are you actively taking part in right now? And then a follow up question to that is realistically, how many professional missions do you think one can have and do well? I know there's some individuality to this answer, everyone's different, but would love your take on it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for myself, experiencing what I went through, I made the active choice to really pull back and kind of start back at square one and then try to rebuild back upwards. So I made sure that when I left for the year, I passed on responsibilities to others to help take on the role in the negotiating setting that I was doing and kind of seeing through on contractual issues. And in terms of the president role in the Doctors of BC, I've actually just taken a step back. I'm going to maintain on the executive setting from that point of view. But I felt like starting back at square one would be a very helpful thing for myself because this goes to a bit of the sabbatical. I found that my ability to be present in my family's life was an essential thing. And the first and foremost thing would be to get myself back to square one, to only build back things that will fit into that scheduled life where I can fit it into time periods that work well for me. So honestly, I'm still quite focused on just being present in my family's life and not.
Before we get to your year away, because I think everyone really wants to hear about it, a couple quick questions. You wrote me a very thoughtful email 3 months ago, and in that you had been very candid and you talked about some health issues that you had experienced, which you described as the nail in the coffin. Can you talk to us about this, Kieran? Because this, in fact, when you wrote that email, it came to me at a time when I was hearing about a lot of bad things happening, people getting sick, and it just really made me stop in my tracks and just tell myself, our health is not something we can take for granted. Yes, we want to achieve and do all these other things, but we can't do it compromising our health and our wellness along the way. So, if you're willing to talk about it, I'd just kind of love to hear it because it was very powerful for me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I think, as we were talking about earlier, the signs of burnout that were accruing in my life and those poignant moments, if that wasn't enough, around the same time, I had been paying attention to what you just described. I've been seeing some health issues in friends around me, and I'd also been, in the nature of medicine, we see the fleeting nature of life where young people are getting significant illnesses all the time. And going further, at the time we just finally had a chance to meet in person at brunch. I was at my college roommate's a funeral essentially in town for that reason, and so that was a stark reminder again of what's happening in this early 40s is when we start to hear of issues happening in people's health. I had been reading a lot around the idea of longevity and health related to what I do in hospitalist medicine. We obviously see a lot of frail elderly, and in that reading, I was hearing about cardiovascular disease and some of the new developments that were happening there. I knew had a strong family history given the East Indian background of my father and some heart disease that ran there. And fast forward after some additional blood tests and this new blood test, this LP little a that's really come onto the scene more recently, I had found I had significant risk for heart disease. And fast forward another few months, I had multi-vessel coronary artery disease with a 70% block in my right coronary artery, which was a total surprise to me as somebody who's been generally fit, active, non-smoker. It really threw me for a loop. So on top of the general stress that I was experiencing, I felt to me at that moment in time like the stress was eating myself from the inside. Of course, these things were already there from a genetic point of view, but it just added to the picture. And that was another big reason to say this is a moment to try to get a refresh and a big impetus for the sabbatical year that our family took.
Blood test that you mentioned, was that LPA, lipoprotein A?
Yeah, LP little a,
Yeah,
exactly. That's the
yeah,
that's the test that really showed a big genetic risk factor for me that again, typically like on the old style when we were in medical school, the Framingham aspect of things, I would not have flagged as somebody that you'd even really consider starting a statin in, but this was the helpful thing. And then
okay,
once I got in touch with the lipidologist, they said, no, you're somebody we should target aggressively to get on top of treatment. And
okay,
and I feel super fortunate because now I'm essentially going to be a primary prevention angle of treating my heart disease. But
absolutely.
again,
Yeah,
stark reminder that even when we feel fit and healthy in our late 30s, early 40s, it's there can be something underneath there.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Kind of, hitting this on right away. Last question before your time away. The one thing I've struggled with is when the kids were young, I felt like those were really, really precious years. My boys are 8 and 11. I feel like for my older son, that golden window, it's still there, but it's coming to an end faster than I think. And I always thought that when the kids were young, maybe that wasn't a great time for me to take on extra responsibilities, extra obligations. But then at some point, we all want to grow and we all want to achieve. Kieran, I'm wondering, based on your experience, because you're a bit further into this parenting game than I am, is there a better time in terms of balancing commitments and time spent with the kids in those golden years? Like, is there an ideal window or a better window than others to start taking on these extra tasks? I'm just would love to know.
Yeah, you and me both, buddy. I'm not sure I know the answer to that right off the hop. It's something that I spent a lot of time thinking about again on that sabbatical year, and I think there was a sense of false confidence in when I talked about kind of getting out of that early career and early phase of being a parent and having three kids. That okay, I got this down. I have this parenting balance. I have the work balance. I have the health balance. I can move on and take the additional aspects of what I want to do in terms of furthering other career aspects. And now having my first adolescent, teenage daughter, I'm telling you, hey, things change quite a bit. There's a totally different dynamic to parenting that you weren't expecting, and oftentimes you have to be just ready to be there in the right moments, and that requires presence. And so, I think if you follow, at least in my mindset, you follow this idea that the additional challenges and hobbies that I'm going to take on in life, I can compartmentalize them into the timing that isn't impeding on the time and availability to be present in my kid's life, then you're in an okay spot. Then it works well. But if it is something that's extending beyond that, you aren't going to know when your child's needs are going to change and you have to be there. In retrospect, I don't think I was checking in enough with my children when I was at my peak responsibility stage and experiencing that burnout. And that's where that outburst from my son, essentially was just his only way to voice what had probably been building for some time. So I think, you know, Later in life, can I see a setting under which my kids are, in university and they don't need me as much? Definitely. But does avoiding any extra challenges in life before then, because you don't want to take any chance that you can't be available for them? I don't think that's the right approach either. I think we just have to be very conscientious of what we're doing and have regular check-ins and listening to the people around you, whether that be your spouse and or your children. Are you having the right balance at that moment in time if that's what's important to you?